Hello, AP students. This is Mrs. Politsky, and I have notes for Chapter 10, Personality. And we're going to talk a little bit about a group of people known as Neo-Freudians. Neo, when we look at that prefix, means new. So these are kind of like the new followers of Sigmund Freud. So as we begin, find your place in our notes and follow along and make sure you get everything that you need here. So let's talk a little bit about Neo-Freudians. That basically means new Freudians, and it refers to theorists, for the most part, who broke away from Sigmund Freud, but whose theories, for the most part, still are on the range of being a psychodynamic or a psychoanalytic aspect. And the big focus here is on motivation as a source of energy for personality. And we're not going to kind of deviate too far away from this importance of the unconscious mind. And that's where we're going to start with. We're going to start with one of Freud's closest advisors and followers until they kind of had a little breakup. And that is a guy named Carl Jung, who you see pictured down here. Carl Jung was a member of Freud's inner circle. He was a colleague. As a matter of fact, there's stories about the fact that Sigmund Freud was a little intimidated by Carl Jung. And maybe that was part of the issues that they had as far as their friendships were concerned. But he broke away from Freud based on a couple of different issues. One, Jung thought that Freud had a overemphasis on sexuality. And if you go back and you look at those Freudian theories, yeah, that's a pretty big core of his philosophy. And so what Jung wanted to do is to kind of dive deeper into that unconscious mind, but not necessarily be fixated on the sexual side of things. He disputed with the very structure of the unconscious mind, and he kind of came up with some different concepts. One being the personal unconsciousness. This is the portion of your unconscious mind that corresponds roughly with Freud's theory on the id. Okay, all those excessive desires and things. There was also something really kind of way off called the unconscious, collective unconscious, which was kind of a reservoir of all of your families or relatives' unconscious memories. And this kind of gets into talking about things like archetypes that supposedly exist in all humans. And archetypes, for the most part, this kind of is like a trace of an ancient memory or image in the collective unconscious. Archetypes appear and reappear in all sorts of areas of the fine arts. So when we talk about drawings in that artistic vein, literature, folk tales from around the world, and a lot of times it kind of falls into some different categories. The animus and the anima represent the masculine and feminine sides of our personalities. Other archetypes kind of give use to the concepts of what we call a mother or a father, or the concept of birth or death, or the hero, or perhaps the trickster, or even God and the self. On the darker side of the self lurks what we call the shadow archetype. This represents the destructive and aggressive tendencies, which kind of, to me, kind of reminds me a little bit of some of the things that maybe Freud talked about with the id. He believed, Jung did, that the cause for mental disorders include not only repressed traumas and conflicts in personal unconsciousness, but also the failure to acknowledge the archetypes that we find unacceptable in our collective unconsciousness. Jung's personality types. Jung's principle of opposites portrays each personality as a balance between opposing pairs of tendencies or dispositions. And we get into talking about something known as introversion and extroversion. And you're going to hear this a little bit more when we get into talking about like the Myers-Briggs trait inventory, or when we start looking at other psychologists and their theories on personality, because a lot of that leans back to talking about Jung. Introversion is basically you're focusing on the inner experience, your inner thoughts and feelings. This is where the concept of being an introvert, somebody who is not really outgoing, kind of a wallflower if you want to call it that. The extroversion is basically one's attention outside of themselves. So these are people who are very people persons, if you want to call it that. They are drawn to things that are going on outside. They're kind of, I guess you could sum that up saying that they are kind of like the life of the party. All right. The evaluation of Jung's work. Jung's influence is strongest outside of psychology, especially in literature and popular press. Jung opened the doors for alternative personality theories, which there are going to be a slew of these that are going to come after him. Jung's notion of personality types makes Jung not only a psychodynamic theorist, but also a pillar in the temperament trait type movement that we're going to hear a little bit about. And as I mentioned before, the Myers-Briggs type indicator really lends a lot of their ideas kind of coming out of Jung in some of his theories. Another neo-Freudian was a woman named Karen Horney. She was, again, an individual who kind of believed in the importance of the unconsciousness, but she really did deviate from Freud and was concerned about the fact that his work was kind of chauvinistic. So Horney, for the most part, disputed Freud's notion of the Oedipus complex and his assertion that women must suffer from penis envy, and determined that personality is not necessarily mainly determined by childhood experiences. There are other issues, and one of the things that she focused more on was something called the basic anxiety. This is kind of an emotion that gives a sense of uncertainty and loneliness in a hostile world that can lead to some kinds of forms of maladjustment. She believed that everyone has a certain number of neurotic needs, and there were roughly 10 of them that she kind of elaborated on. A need for attention and approval, a need for a partner and the dread of being left alone, the need to restrict one's life and remain inconspicuous, the need for power and controls over others, the need to exploit others. I mean, some of these sound kind of dark. A need for recognition and prestige, okay, a need for personal admiration, a need for personal achievement, sounding a little bit of like Maslow's theories here, a need for self-sufficiency and independence, and finally a need for unassailability. So when we go back and evaluate her work, her theories for the most part, kind of like a lot of Freudian theories, really don't have a scientific foundation. So if you were obviously a behavioralist, you were probably dissing this theory very quickly because of the fact that you couldn't test it. Another neo-Freudian was a guy named Alfred Adler. Adler also split from the psychoanalytic world when he proposed theories that encompass things like birth order. So if you're a firstborn, secondborn, middle child, the baby of the family and only child, wherever you fall in the family line of things will kind of in a way shape your personality. He also had some discussions about lifestyle, and one idea was known as the inferiority complex. A lot of times this happens to people who are like the babies of the family, or the youngest or one of the youngers in the family, because you're always kind of trying to play catch up in a sense. So that inferiority complex, feelings of inferiority, it's largely within the unconscious mind, but it's rooted in childhood, that you're never quite skilled as maybe an older sibling. When you're the baby of a family, especially large families, it doesn't matter how old you're going to be, you're always going to be the baby of the family. According to Adler, the cause of this complex can be as simple as being told that you're dumb or that you're not good at something to the extent that you actually believe it. And one way to deal with this is something known as compensation, making up for what you consider to be a real or imagined deficiency. So a lot of times, like firstborns are typically a lot of times left in charge of their younger siblings. They always seem to have a little more responsibility, maybe a little more respect from their parents, whereas the baby of the family might be the jokester. And they might compensate for the fact that they might not get a lot of responsibility by being kind of the class clown, so to speak. Other neo-Freudian theories, the post-Freudians, for the most part, made significant changes in psychoanalysis. They put greater emphasis on ego functions. If you can remember back to Freud, ego is kind of the moderator between the id and the superego. They also looked at those ego defenses, the development of the self, and also the consciousness or conscious thought as a major component of personality. They also viewed social variables such as culture, family, and peers as having an important role in shaping personality. And these things extended personality development well beyond childhood to kind of reflect the whole lifespan. Thank you very much.